There are moments in life that you never forget, not because you want to remember them, but because they mark you, like a scar across your soul. You can't erase them. You can't rewrite them. You simply learn to live with them. This was one of those moments. It started like any other evening. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that settles after the chaos of the day. The kids were asleep, tucked into their beds with the ease that only childhood allows. I had just finished cleaning up, folding cloths, straightening up the kitchen, the small routines that filled the gaps of my wife's absence. Elena was working a flight that night. She had been a flight attendant for years, long before we got married. The schedule was tough, long hours, time zone shifting, weeks where we barely saw each other. But we had adapted. We had found a rhythm. Or so I thought. I remember sitting down on the couch, reaching for my phone out of habit. A message notification flickered on the screen, Anna. The name alone made me pause. Anna wasn't a close friend, more like an acquaintance, someone I had met through Elena. They worked for the same airline but weren't particularly close. The last time we had spoken was months ago, maybe longer. There was no reason for her to be messaging me now. Something in my gut twisted. I opened the message. I need to tell you something. I wouldn't have gotten involved, but you deserve to know. It was strange how a few words could set off a chain reaction inside me. A deep, unsettling feeling took root before I even fully understood why. I typed back, "What is it?" Seconds passed. Then the response came. "Your wife." She was with a passenger on her last flight. More than just talking. I saw them. "I'm sorry." At first, the words didn't fully register. They floated in front of me, weightless, as if they belonged to someone else's life. My mind clung to the possibility that I was misunderstanding, that this was some kind of mistake. I blinked, reading it again. And again. And then it hit. A slow, suffocating pressure in my chest. I sat up straighter, my grip on the phone tightening. My pulse pounded in my ears, a dull, rhythmic thud. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I typed fast. "Are you sure?" Her reply was immediate. "I wouldn't be messaging you if I wasn't." A strange sort of numbness spread through me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What do you even say to something like that? I needed details. I needed proof. Who was he? This time, there was a pause before she answered. "A passenger. I don't know his name. I just know she was close to him. More than she should have been. They spent time together after the flight. She went to his hotel room. I don't know what happened after that, but I think you do." I stared at the message. There it was. The confirmation. The invisible line that could never be uncrossed. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were outside my own body, observing myself from a distance. My heart was beating too fast. My breathing felt wrong, too shallow, too controlled, like I was forcing air into my lungs. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I ran through every possible explanation, searching for something, anything, that could make this make sense. Maybe Anna was mistaken. Maybe Elena had gone to the hotel for something else. Maybe it was nothing. But a voice in the back of my mind whispered something colder. "You know the truth. You just don't want to accept it." I stood up abruptly, pacing across the living room. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. My eyes landed on the framed photos lining the shelves, our wedding picture, Elena holding our firstborn, a family vacation from 2 summers ago. I had spent 10 years building a life with this woman. 10 years of laughter, of struggles, of late-night conversations whispered in the dark. We had 2 children together. We had vowed to be there for each other. And yet, in one night, one decision, she had shattered it all. I sat back down, elbows resting on my knees, fingers pressed against my temples. My thoughts were a tangled mess. Why? That was the question clawing at me. Why would she do this? Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose was? We had arguments, sure. There were nights when the distance between us felt wider than it should. But I loved her. I had never strayed, never once thought of betraying her. And now she had done this? For what? A meaningless encounter with a stranger? I checked the time. 11:37 p.m. Elena's flight had landed hours ago. She was probably at her hotel right now, sleeping soundly, unaware that her betrayal had already reached me. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over her name and my contacts. I wanted to call. I wanted to demand answers. To hear her voice crack under the weight of the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to control this. Losing my temper wouldn't change what had happened. Screaming wouldn't undo the choices she had made. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, to sit in the silence, to let it sink in. I had to be careful with what came next. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about our family, about our children, and most of all, it was about justice. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, phone in hand, staring at Elena's contact name on the screen. I could have called her. I could have sent a message. But I didn't. There was something about hearing her voice before I was ready that felt wrong. I wasn't sure what I'd say, or if I'd be able to stop myself from shouting the second she picked up. No, I needed to face her in person. I needed to see her reaction. Her flight was scheduled to land at noon. She hadn't messaged me that night, which wasn't unusual. After late flights, she often went straight to the hotel, too exhausted for small talk. I had never questioned it before. Now, I wondered how many times she had done this. How many times I had been stupid enough to trust her. The morning passed in slow, suffocating silence. The kids were at school. I moved through the house, going through the motions, but my mind was locked onto a single moment in the near future, the moment Elena walked through the front door. At 12:52 p.m., I heard the key turn in the lock. I was sitting at the kitchen table. A cup of untouched coffee sat in front of me, now cold. The second the door opened, my heart began to beat faster. Elena walked in, setting her bag down near the entrance. She looked the same as always, a hair tied back, uniform slightly wrinkled from the long flight, face calm, unaware. She saw me sitting there and smiled. Hey. I didn't smile back. She must have noticed the stiffness in my posture, the way I was staring at her, because the smile faltered. She hesitated for a second, then stepped forward. Everything okay? I watched her closely, searching for something, guilt, hesitation, anything. But her face was neutral. Too neutral. I exhaled slowly, forcing my voice to stay even. We need to talk. Something in my tone made her pause. She set her phone on the counter, her fingers brushing the screen like she was considering checking it before deciding against it. Okay, she said, dragging the word out slightly. What's wrong? I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch between us. I know what you did. The words were direct. No accusations, no raised voice. Just a statement. Her brows pulled together. A second passed. Then another. I saw it happen, the flicker of confusion, the moment her brain tried to piece together what I meant, and then the exact second she understood. Her lips parted slightly. Her shoulders tensed. But she didn't say anything right away. I kept my eyes on her. Are you going to say something? She blinked. I don't know what you're talking about. It was a pathetic attempt. A bad lie. I let out a short breath. Don't do that. Don't insult me. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. I'm not insulting you. I just don't know what you mean. I leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. Anna told me. Her face barely changed, but I caught it, the slightest shift in her breathing, the way her throat moved when she swallowed. I don't know why she would say anything, she said, her voice quieter now. Not a denial. Not a single protest of innocence. Just that. My jaw tightened. So it's true. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I didn't say that. But you're not denying it. She pressed a hand to her forehead, as if the conversation itself was exhausting her. Then, finally, she looked up at me. It was a mistake. I sat completely still. The rage in my chest was ice cold now. Controlled. How long? I asked. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. How long? Her lips pressed together. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. One night. I let the words settle. Let them sink into the walls, into the floor, into my skin. One night. I should have felt relief that it wasn't an affair, that it hadn't been happening for months, years. But all I felt was disgust. How? My voice was steady. How did it happen? She looked away, eyes starting to the side like she was searching for an escape. Then she sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. I was drinking, she said. After the flight. A few of us went to the hotel bar. He was there. We started talking. It just happened. I stared at her. It just happened. She flinched at the way I said it. She shook her head. I wasn't thinking. I had too much to drink, and she stopped, inhaling sharply. I messed up. There it was. I messed up. As if that could erase it. As if those words could wipe away what she had done. I nodded slowly. Were you ever going to tell me? She exhaled through her nose. No. I already knew the answer. But hearing her say it felt like another cut. I leaned back, my hands resting on the table. Why? Her lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. Then she shook her head, like the words were too heavy to say out loud. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. I let out a short, bitter laugh. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated. You didn't want to hurt me, but you did it anyway? She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. I don't know what you want me to say. I want the truth. I gave you the truth. I shook my head. No, you gave me the bare minimum. Tell me why. She hesitated. I saw it then, the flicker of something else in her eyes. Not just regret. Something deeper. I was unhappy, she said. My chest tightened. She looked away. I love you. I love our family. But I felt stuck. I felt like we weren't even us anymore. We barely talk. We barely touch. I wanted to feel something again. I didn't say anything. Because if I did, I might say something I couldn't take back. She took a small step forward. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about you. It was about me. And I know that sounds selfish, but it's the truth. I let her words hang in the air. Then I nodded once. It is selfish. She winced. I stood up, pushed the chair back. Where are you going? She asked. I grabbed my keys. To clear my head. She reached for me. Please. I pulled away before she could touch me. She looked at me. But I didn't care. I turned and walked out the door. I needed air. I needed distance. Because if I stayed in that house for one more second, I wasn't sure what I would do. I drove without a destination. I needed to think. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white from the pressure. The streets blurred past me, but my mind was locked on one thing. What Elena had done. Every word she said replayed in my head. I was unhappy. I wanted to feel something again. Like that justified it. Like that excused the fact that she had destroyed everything over one night with a complete stranger. She had no idea what she had done to me. To our family. She thought she could say it was a mistake, that she could cry and apologize, and I would just accept it. Move on. Pretend like it never happened. That wasn't going to happen. She had betrayed me. Now, I would make sure she felt everything I felt. Not through screaming, not through anything reckless. No, my revenge would be calculated. Legal. Moral. Made her life fall apart the way she had made mine collapse in a single night. I pulled over at a parking lot, resting my hands on the wheel, breathing slowly. I needed to be smart. I needed to take this one step at a time. I unlocked my phone and started going through everything. Her messages, her call history, her emails. She wasn't home right now. She probably wasn't expecting me to do anything yet. That was her first mistake. I found exactly what I was looking for. Bank statements. Transactions from hotels, restaurants, little purchases that didn't make sense. None of them stood out alone, but together, they painted a picture, one that made my stomach turn. She had spent money on him. A dinner here, a drink there. Nothing major, nothing that screamed affair on its own, but enough that I knew what it was. I took screenshots of everything. Every receipt, every payment linked to her personal card, every transaction that had no explanation. She was sloppy. Maybe she thought I'd never check. Next, I went to her social media. Most of it was normal. Pictures of our family, our kids, work trips. But then I checked her private messages. Locked. Password protected. She had never done that before. Another mistake. It took me 5 minutes to guess her password. Our wedding anniversary. I started reading. There weren't many messages, at least not recent ones. She must have deleted most of them. But she had missed one. A simple "had a great time. Hope you made it home safe." Sent from an unknown number. I copied it. Then, I did the one thing she never thought I would do. I called our lawyer. Elena didn't know this, but I had met with a lawyer months ago. Not for divorce. Not even for anything serious. It was about updating our wills, making sure our assets were organized. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it was the most important call I would ever make. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. I need to file for divorce. And I need to make sure she gets nothing. There was a pause. You want full custody? Yes. Do you have proof of infidelity? I looked at my phone, at the screenshots, at the messages. I will. He exhaled. Then let's meet tomorrow. I hung up. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about making sure she didn't win. She had betrayed me, lied to me, and expected me to just accept it. She thought I would be too broken to do anything. She thought she still had control. She was wrong. When I got home, she was waiting, sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded together, eyes red from crying. She had been thinking, planning what to say next. Probably thought we would have some long emotional talk where I forgave her. She looked up when I walked in. Where were you? I set my keys down, meeting her gaze. Handling things. She swallowed. Are you leaving? No. A flicker of hope crossed her face, but I wasn't done. But you are. Her mouth opened slightly. What? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots. Her transactions, her messages, her mistakes. I spoke to a lawyer, I said calmly. I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking full custody of the kids. You're going to move out. She paled. You, what? No, we need to talk about this. I already did all the talking I needed to do. Tears welled in her eyes. You can't just kick me out. I let out a short breath. Actually, I can. The house is in my name. Her face crumpled. Please. I didn't care. Not anymore. You made your choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. She reached for me, but I stepped back. I was done. She wasn't my problem anymore. Elena was still in the house. I had told her to leave, but she didn't. Instead, she lingered, as if delaying the inevitable would somehow change the outcome. She moved through the rooms quietly, avoiding me, waiting for the right moment to bring up the conversation she thought would make a difference. She was wrong. I spent most of the day on my own, making arrangements. I called my lawyer again, making sure everything was in motion. I gathered important documents, bank statements, property records, insurance policies. I had no intention of being careless. Elena had already taken something from me that I could never get back, but I wasn't going to let her take anything else. She finally spoke that evening. I had just finished packing a few bags for the kids, preparing to drop them off at my parents' house for the weekend. I wanted them out of here before this conversation happened. They didn't need to see what was coming. Elena stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed, watching me. You're really doing this? Her voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge underneath. I didn't look at her. Yes. She exhaled through her nose. You won't even talk to me? I zipped up the bag. We talked. That wasn't talking. That was you deciding everything without even listening to me. I turned to face her. What do you want me to say, Elena? That I understand? That I get why you did it? Because I don't. She shook her head. I never said you had to understand. I laughed under my breath. No, you just want me to pretend like this can be fixed. She hesitated. It can be fixed. I stared at her. How? She blinked. I stepped closer. Tell me, how do we fix this? Do we go to therapy? Do I just wake up tomorrow and forget that you betrayed me? That every time I look at you, all I'll see is what you did? Her shoulders tensed. People come back from this. I nodded. Maybe they do, but I won't. Her face crumpled slightly. She took a deep breath, trying to hold herself together. It was one night. I shook my head, and that's all it took. She swallowed. I didn't plan for it to happen. I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, it just happened. She hesitated again, as if she was trying to find the right words, the right excuse that would make this less terrible than it was. I was drinking. I wasn't thinking. I nodded slowly. You weren't thinking when you sat next to him? When you flirted with him? When you left the bar with him? I tilted my head. At what point, exactly, did you stop thinking? Her lower lip trembled. I don't know. I clenched my jaw. That's not good enough. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. I don't know what you want from me. I stared at her. I want the truth. I already gave you the truth, she snapped. I messed up. I know I did. But it wasn't because I wanted to hurt you. I stayed silent. She took a shaky breath. I was unhappy. I nodded. Yeah, you said that already. She swallowed. I didn't feel like us anymore. We barely talked. We barely touched. I felt like I wasn't even your wife, just someone who lived here. I inhaled slowly. And instead of telling me that, you slept with a stranger. Tears welled in her eyes again. I didn't do it to hurt you. But you did. She wiped at her face, trying to keep herself composed. I don't want to lose you. I exhaled through my nose. You lost me the second you walked into this hotel room. She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to hold back a full breakdown. Please. I turned back to the bag. I need to drop the kids off. She stepped forward. Wait. I didn't stop moving. Elena, I said evenly. I told you what's happening. I'm filing for divorce. You need to start packing your things. She let out a choked breath. Where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Your parents. A hotel. It's not my problem. She looked at me. Not your problem? I met her gaze. You stopped being my problem the moment you stopped being my wife. She flinched. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me like she was still trying to wake up from this nightmare she had created for herself. Like she couldn't believe it was real. Like she thought there was still a way out of it. She took a shaky breath. What about the kids? I zipped up the last bag. They stay with me. Her voice cracked. You can't just decide that. I met her gaze. Actually, I can. She shook her head, fresh tears running down her cheeks. They're my kids too. I nodded. And you should have thought about them before you did what you did. She wiped at her face again. I made a mistake. But that doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean I don't love you. I let out a breath. You don't love me, Elena. Yes, I do. I shook my head. No. You love what I gave you. You love the security, the stability, the life I built for us. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. But you didn't love me enough to stay faithful. And that's the only thing that matters now. She covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders trembling. I picked up the bag and turned to leave. Her voice came out broken. Can I at least say goodbye to them? They'll be back on Sunday. She nodded weakly. And after that? You'll get visitation, I said. Like every other parent who makes the wrong choices. She winced. I walked to the door. My hand was on the knob when she spoke again. Did you ever love me? I didn't turn around. I did. And then I walked out. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that felt unnatural, like something had been cut out of reality and left a hollow space behind. Elena was gone. She hadn't argued when I told her to leave, at least not anymore. She had packed a few bags and left without another word. There was no dramatic exit, no final attempt to beg or negotiate. Just the sound of the front door closing behind her, leaving behind nothing but the weight of what she had done. I sat in the living room for a long time after she left, staring at nothing in particular. The house still looked the same, but everything about it felt different. The pictures on the walls, the furniture, the small details of our life together, none of it felt real anymore. The kids were still at my parents' house. I had wanted them out of here before this all happened. They didn't need to see the fallout, didn't need to feel the tension or hear the arguments. As far as they knew, their mother had gone away for a while. I would have to explain everything to them eventually, but not yet. Right now, I just needed to get through the next few days. I went through the house, room by room, removing anything that reminded me of her. The framed wedding photos came down first. The pictures of family vacations, the anniversary gifts, the little notes she used to leave for me on the fridge, all of it went into a box. I didn't throw anything away, not yet. I wasn't sure if it was because I wanted to keep them for the kids or because I wasn't ready to erase everything completely. The bed felt different that night. Too much space. Too much emptiness. Sleep didn't come easily, but I didn't fight it. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for exhaustion to take over. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. The paperwork was already in motion. The process wouldn't be immediate, but I made it clear that I wanted things to move as quickly as possible. There was nothing to negotiate. The house was in my name. The custody arrangement would favor me. Elena had no grounds to fight back. She had no leverage, no argument that would hold up in court. I had proof of her betrayal, and I was going to use it. After leaving the lawyer's office, I drove around aimlessly. I wasn't ready to go back home just yet. Being in that house alone made it feel like everything was sinking in all over again. Instead, I parked in an empty lot and sat there for a while, thinking. Elena had tried to justify what she did by saying she was unhappy, that she felt like we weren't us anymore. But I had been unhappy too. I had noticed the distance between us, the way things weren't the same as they used to be. The difference was, I had never betrayed her. I had never taken the easy way out and thrown everything away for a temporary escape. The thing that bothered me the most wasn't even the act itself. It was how she had chosen to do it. She had gone to work, smiled at me before leaving, kissed our kids, and then, a few hours later, had been with someone else. She had made a decision, step by step, knowing what she was doing the entire time. And then she had come home and pretended like nothing happened. She had slept in the same bed, eaten meals with me, looked me in the eye, all while knowing what she had done. That was what I couldn't forgive. Eventually, I went back home. The silence was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating this time. Maybe it was because I knew she wasn't coming back. There was no uncertainty anymore, no lingering questions. This was the reality now. I was a single father. My marriage was over. I spent the rest of the day going through the logistics of everything. Contacting banks, updating accounts, making sure the legal side of things was moving forward. I wasn't going to let emotions slow me down. The faster this was over, the better. The kids came back on Sunday, just like I had planned. They didn't ask too many questions at first. They were young enough that they didn't fully understand what was happening. I kept things simple. Their mother wasn't going to be living here anymore, but they would still see her. That was all they needed to know for now. The first few weeks were a transition. There were moments where it hit me all over again, usually in the quiet moments. Sitting at the dinner table with just the kids. Waking up in an empty bed. The absence of small things I hadn't even realized I would notice. Her toothbrush missing from the sink. Her clothes no longer in the closet. The way she used to hum to herself when making coffee in the morning. These were things I had taken for granted before, and now they were just reminders of how quickly everything could change. But with time, the house started to feel normal again. I established new routines, focused on the kids, made sure life moved forward. There was no point in sitting in the past. What was done. Elena had made her choice. I had made mine. And now, I was going to make sure this new life, without her, was better than the one she had ruined. I didn't hear from her much, outside of arrangements for the kids. She had tried to call a few times at first, but I never answered. I had nothing left to say to her. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. There was no fixing this, no rekindling anything. She was just a chapter that had ended. Months passed. The divorce was finalized. The custody agreement was set. Elena had visitation rights, but the kids lived with me full-time. It was what I had wanted from the start, and I had gotten it. In the end, she had lost more than I had. She lost her home, her stability, her role in this family. She had said she was unhappy, and now she was truly alone. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had moved on. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The divorce was finalized. The paperwork was signed, the agreements were in place, and the legal system had done its part. There was no ceremony to mark the end of it, no dramatic moment where everything came crashing down. It was just a series of signatures, emails from my lawyer, and a final confirmation that my marriage was legally over. There was no relief, no excitement, no sadness, just a quiet acceptance that this chapter of my life was finished. Life settled into a new routine. The house belonged only to me and the kids now, and without Elena's presence, it started to feel like my home rather than a shared space filled with memories I didn't want. The changes were gradual but noticeable. I rearranged the furniture, removed the last of her belongings, replaced things that reminded me of her. The wedding photos were gone. Any trace of what we had once been was erased. The focus was on moving forward, not holding on to something in the past. The children adapted faster than I expected. At first, there were questions, small ones that hinted at a deeper confusion they weren't yet able to put into words. I gave them simple answers. Their mother had made choices that meant she couldn't live with us anymore, but she still loved them, and they would still see her. That was all they needed to know. The specifics of what had happened were not their burden to carry. Elena's visits were structured and infrequent. She saw the kids on weekends, but our paths rarely crossed. We communicated only when necessary, always through short, impersonal messages. There was nothing left to discuss beyond schedules. She never asked about me, never tried to repair what had been broken. If she regretted anything, she kept it to herself. I had no interest in knowing. I focused on work, on being a father, on rebuilding a life that no longer included her. The house, once filled with the weight of betrayal, became a place of stability again. I cooked meals for the kids, helped them with schoolwork, spent weekends taking them on trips instead of wasting time in arguments or resentment. Everything was structured, predictable, solid. Exactly how it needed to be. Months passed, then a year. Time moved forward whether I thought about her or not. There was no sudden moment of clarity, no grand realization. Just a slow, steady return to normalcy. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I wasn't broken. I simply was. What had happened belonged to the past, and I had no intention of carrying it with me any longer than necessary. I heard about Elena through other people. She had moved into a small apartment. She wasn't dating anyone, at least not that anyone knew of. Some people said she had changed, that she was quieter now, less social. It didn't concern me. Her life was her own, just as mine was mine. There was no satisfaction in knowing she had lost more than I had. No need to see her struggle or suffer. Indifference had replaced everything else. One day, she sent a message. A short, simple text asking if we could talk, just the two of us. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it without responding. There was nothing left to say. Moving on wasn't a decision, it was a process. One that didn't require dramatic gestures or forced closure. It was just a matter of living, of filling each day with things that mattered, of focusing on what was in front of me instead of what was behind. Life continued, and I had no interest in looking back. The past was finished. The future was mine,